Join me as we unlock the stories of the past, turning the pages of history to discover the vibrant lives, struggles, and triumphs that have shaped our world. The sky above you is the color of steel stretched taut over the churning North Sea. Wind lashes at your cloak and salt stings your cheeks. You grip the side of the longship tighter as another wave slaps the hull like a drunken insult. The oarsmen grunt, timing their strokes to the barking rhythm of a bearded man who's somehow both yelling and half asleep. Welcome to the 9th century. You're somewhere between Norway and what the locals will soon call England, and if you're lucky, you'll reach shore with all your limbs and most of your teeth. The crew isn't exactly chatty. They mutter in Old Norse, their expressions unreadable beneath shaggy brows and wet braids. One man sharpens a sayax casually, his eyes flicking toward you in a way that suggests you're either a guest or dinner. The distinction blurs on stormy nights. This was the world into which the real Uhtred of Bebbanburg was born. Or to be annoyingly precise, a few generations before him. But history likes to begin with drama, and nothing screams you probably won't survive this quite like a Viking voyage across the winter sea. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. Let's see who else is trying to fall asleep while imagining hypothermia and sword fights. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You land near the northeastern coast of Britain, on a stretch of rocky beach where the wind whistles through ruined Roman watchtowers and seaweed gathers in forgotten footprints. This is not modern-day England, with its cozy B&Bs and mild signage. This is a land of splintered kingdoms, Bernicia, Dara, Northumbria, all clinging to identity like toddlers fighting over a wooden sword. You squint toward the inland cliffs, and there it is, Bebbanburg, a crag of stone rising out of the landscape, its ramparts older than most of the languages still being invented around it. Later, it'll be called Bamberg Castle, but for now it's Bebbanburg Fortress, of legend symbol of power and Uhtred's ancestral home. Legend says it was named after a Queen Bebba, the wife of an Anglo-Saxon king, who had the bright idea to build a stronghold where seagulls can kill a man with a well-aimed dropping. This wasn't just a scenic location, it was strategic. Overlooking the sea, the fortress was practically daring invaders to try something. Many did. One fun fringe tidbit. The original wooden defenses were likely so covered in fish scales and tar that they smelled like a fish market lit on fire. Another archaeologist found signs that the people here used combs made of whalebone, just in case you were wondering how they kept those rugged Saxon beards from turning into bird nests. You trudge up a slippery goat path, slipping more than you'd admit if anyone were watching. The fortress looms above you, its walls dark with age moss and a good deal of Viking graffiti runes, carved in idle moments, some of which might translate to something profound. Or just Ragnar was here. Historians still argue whether Bebbanburg was truly as grand in Uhtred's youth as the later tales suggest, or whether memory simply gilded its stones. What's certain is that the site has been inhabited and fortified for centuries by Britain's Romans Angles, and eventually the Normans, who'll replace anything wooden with stone, and anything Saxon with taxes. Inside the fortress, you hear the clatter of iron on stone, the hiss of cooking fat, and the occasional burst of laughter that always follows someone falling into a latrine pit. The daily life of the stronghold's inhabitants was surprisingly mundane: boiling water, spinning wool, telling stories, sharpening blades, and probably arguing about whose turn it was to shovel out the goat stalls. You duck into a smoky hall where dried herbs hang from rafters and a massive fire pit dominates the room. A bearded warrior gestures for you to sit, no words needed. You sip something that might be ale or might be boiled turnips and you listen. The stories flow like the wind outside, full of names you can't pronounce and betrayals that echo down generations. Bebbanburg isn't just a place, it's a symbol. It's pride heritage, the stubborn dream of home, in a world that doesn't believe in permanence. For Uhtred, who's yet to be born, this fortress will become the center of every hope and every regret. But for now, as the fire crackles and the night deepens, you just feel lucky to be somewhere dry-ish. And then someone lets in the goats. The goats don't stay long, just long enough to chew on a wool cloak, knock over a bucket of barley, and remind you that even in legendary strongholds, barnyard chaos is never far away. One of them eyes you judgmentally before trotting back into the cold. You pull your cloak tighter and move closer to the fire, but your thoughts linger outside. Bebbanburg wasn't always Uhtred's. Before his birth, before the wars and the shifting allegiances, it stood as a relic of even older times. You step outside again into the dawn mist, and suddenly it's centuries earlier. Roman banners still fly in patches across Britannia, but they're ragged, tired things. You walk a path once trodden by sandals, not boots. You pass a ruined Roman signal tower, just a crumbling pile of stones now half swallowed by bracken. Once it would have blinked messages in torchlight along the coast, a military WhatsApp for a distant empire. Those days are long gone. The legions have retreated. What's left is a mess of local warlords, imported religions, and confused farmers who aren't sure if they're Britons, Romans, or just really unlucky Saxons. Bebbanburg, before it was even called, that was likely a coastal stronghold of some significance. The fortress sat high and strategic, guarding access to the land behind it. As waves pounded the cliffs below, it would have served as a beacon of power, or at least as a place with fewer bears than the woods. You descend from the fortress to the grassy plains behind, where a scattering of huts clings to a creek. Here, early Anglian settlers farm barter and raise children who'll one day inherit their father's feuds. You see a woman tending a fire with the stick that might double as a weapon, and a boy chasing pigs that are surprisingly agile. This is the rhythm of early Northumbria mud smoke and stubborn people. Historians still argue whether Northumbria should be viewed as a unified kingdom at this point, or more of a fractious co-op of grumpy barons and hard-bitten monks. What we do know is that sometime in the 7th century, a king named Oswald got himself sainted and helped give the region some structure, mostly through force of arms and clever theology. Oswald's brother Oswiu eventually expanded the kingdom to its largest extent, absorbing lands to the north and west. You imagine him standing where you now stand, looking out at a land patchworked by farms, marshes, and small hill forts. He probably didn't enjoy the view as much as you being king, meant fending off attacks from Picts Mercians and the occasional annoyed cousin. A quirky historical detail. One of the early kings of Bernicia, Ethelfrith, reportedly drove out monks from Lindisfarne because their prayers annoyed him. He also might have started one of Britain's bloodiest battles because someone insulted his horse. Priorities were different. Another fringe tidbit: Northumbrian nobility had a tradition of naming sons with uat, or Oz, which, if nothing else, made roll call during war councils sound like someone sneezing repeatedly. Uhtred, in fact, is one of the more coherent examples. As the centuries churn, you watch cultures layer over one another like old wallpaper. Roman structures are dismantled and repurposed roof tiles become floor mosaics. Aqueducts become goat troughs. Christianity comes in strong, then blends awkwardly with local customs. You see a shrine with a cross and a severed boar's head tied to the side just in case. You slip into a small wooden church. Inside, a monk scribbles Latin in a dim corner, muttering about ink blots and heresy. He pauses to explain that they're trying to convert the locals who mostly not agree, then sneak off to sacrifice chickens to Odin. Progress is slow, he whispers, rubbing his temples. Rubbing. And yet this fusion of old and new Saxon and Norse, sacred and profane, is precisely what makes Northumbria such a fascinating tangle of a place. It isn't one story, it's dozens, interwoven, contradictory, and never quite finished. Outside, children play in the dirt with carved wooden figures. One holds a sword, the other a tiny shield. You hear one shout, "I'm Uhtred," and the other retorts, "No, I'm Uhtred." The name already holds weight even before the man himself lives. It's strange how legends begin quietly like a whisper in the fog. The mist thickens now, and you imagine Bebbanburg on the cliff behind you. Not as a castle or a home, but as a promise. A fixed point in a world where names change, borders melt, and loyalties rot like bad apples. For generations, men will fight for it, dream of it, claim it. And sometimes, like the real Uhtred, lose it entirely only to claw their way back. You head toward the shore again, passing a woman singing to herself while washing clothes in a stream. Her song is soft, almost modern in its melody, though the words are ancient and full of strange consonants. She smiles at you and says something in Old English. You pretend to understand. It's polite. And as the tide rolls in again, you wonder how many stories like Uhtred's were lost to time. Farmers who became warriors, monks who became spies, women who ruled from behind the curtain of history, none remembered because they lacked a scribe or a Netflix deal. But Uhtred, his story, survived. In pieces, yes. With embellishments, naturally, but beneath the fiction there was a man, a lord, a warrior, a Northumbrian. And his journey began here on these stones before he even took his first breath. The goats are back. The goats give you a wide berth this time, perhaps having judged you as unworthy of chewing. Fair enough. You step aside and let them pass, hooves clicking on the stones like impatient drumbeats. The morning fog begins to thin and a new sound joins the air, a chant low and steady carried by the wind. You follow it. Past the outer huts and down a slope lined with gorse and thistle, you arrive at a small burial mound. A figure stands there, a priest or perhaps a shaman. It's hard to tell. He's dressed in layered wool embroidered with symbols from two worlds, a cross around his neck, but Thor's hammer sewn into his sleeve. This is a land still negotiating with itself. And this is where our Uhtred begins. Not the fictional warrior turned heartthrob of TV screens, but a real person, Uhtred of Northumbria, born in the mid-10th century. You won't find a birth certificate or baby footprints in clay, but records those dry, grumpy Anglo-Saxon chronicles hint at a lineage thick with land, blood, and power. He was born a noble. That much we know. A descendant of the lords of Bamberg or Bebbanburg, depending on how many vowels you like in your fortress names. His family controlled Northumbria's northeastern coast, a region as strategic as it was windswept. They were not kings, but they didn't exactly ask permission either. You sit at the edge of a wooden hall where Uhtred might have taken his first steps. A dog barks, chickens flap by, and someone's arguing over fish. Life is a rhythm of hard labor, shared meals, and the occasional dramatic feud. Children grow up quickly here. Uhtred certainly would have. And then everything changes. Around the time young Uhtred could hold a sword without tipping over, the Danes stormed the coast. Again, they had a habit of doing that. Unlike the polished horned helmet image you've been sold, these were a messy crew traders, warriors, and occasionally poets who happened to be excellent at raiding monasteries. Some accounts suggest that Uhtred's father, or perhaps his grandfather, depending on the version, was killed defending Eoforwich, the city we now call York. The details vary. In some versions, the family is overrun. In others, there's betrayal. What's agreed upon is this Uhtred still a boy is taken, kidnapped. Fostered adopted historians still argue whether young nobles given to Viking families were prisoners or political pawns. Probably both. One day you're learning prayers in Latin, the next you're being taught to gut a man while drinking mead. Childhood was dynamic, a quirky tidbit. In some parts of Viking society, fosterage was a bond even tighter than blood. A boy raised by a Norse chieftain might grow up calling his captor father and mean it. And if that sounds confusing, well, welcome to 10th century England, where loyalty was less about DNA and more about who's holding the axe. Another fringe fact: the Vikings had remarkably strict hair grooming traditions. You imagine Uhtred, now a lanky, wide-eyed teen, having his head half-shaved, the remaining hair combed forward in the Norse style. It's a look. One that says, I will set fire to your church, but look fabulous doing it. You spend time in the Danish settlement where Uhtred grows up. It's not a brutal prison camp, but a rough, vibrant village. The people work hard, drink harder, and laugh in the face of just about everything, including death taxes and anyone named Ethelred. He learns their language. He eats their food, mostly stewed meat flatbread, and anything that can survive a northern winter. He watches their ritual sacrifices to Odin, whispers to the Norns drinking contests that double as political alliances, and he learns to fight. Training isn't elegant, it's muddy bruising and occasionally involves sheep. Wooden swords thud against makeshift shields and you hear curses in 3 languages. Young Uhtred becomes strong, not in the gym-sculpted way, but in the way of boys who grow up lifting barrels and dodging knives. His identity begins to blur. Is he still a Saxon or something else entirely? The older men argue around him. One says he should return to claim Bebbanburg. Another says it's lost, taken by an uncle who smells like mold and betrayal. A third says the gods will decide. Uhtred, for his part, sharpens his blade in silence. Historians still argue whether this Uhtred, the one raised among Danes, was truly loyal to their cause, or simply waiting for the right moment to reclaim his birthright. His name shows up in records on both sides of the battlefield. Either he was very confused, very cunning, or both. At a feast you sit beside him. He's older now, 15, maybe 16, and already carries himself like a man. He drinks sparingly, listens sharply, and watches people like a wolf sizing up a herd. You ask if he misses home. He says nothing, but his fingers tap a rhythm on the table, 4 beats like a march, or maybe a warning. A bard strums a lyre and begins to sing a tale about a boy stolen from a fortress, raised by enemies and destined to take back what was his. Everyone cheers. No one seems to notice Uhtred leaving early. You follow, outside the stars wheel overhead. The wind carries the smell of pine and salt, and you see him staring at the sky, lips moving slightly. A prayer, a curse you'll never know. But in that moment you realize the boy is no longer confused. He knows exactly who he is. And one day Bebbanburg will remember his name. You wake to the clink of metal and the grunt of exertion. Somewhere nearby, Uhtred is swinging a blade at a straw-stuffed post like it just insulted his mother. The air smells of sweat earth and the faint tang of pine pitch used to waterproof shields and occasionally hair. Training among the Danes is relentless. It's not just about who can swing harder, but who can read an opponent, who knows when to feint, when to laugh off a wound, and when to keep a hand on a dagger during a hug. Uhtred is learning not just combat, but culture. And culture in 10th century England often involves shouting, spitting, and storytelling at volume. You follow him into a Danish long hall, the heart of the settlement. It's dim and smoky with thick beams overhead and furs lining the benches. The fire pit in the center crackles beneath a spit-roasted pig that has seen better days. Around it, warriors sprawl with the ease of people who are either drunk or very good at pretending to be. Uhtred slips into the rhythm of the place. He drinks from a horn passed down the table. He listens to boasts, adds a few of his own, and laughs like he's earned it. This isn't forced assimilation, it's something deeper. The Danes may have stolen him, but they've also given him something, a sense of belonging. But don't get too comfortable. There's tension here, always just under the surface. These are not people who trust easily, even when they like you, especially when they like you. That open laugh from across the table might turn into a grudge the moment you challenge someone's place in the shield wall. One of Uhtred's foster brothers, let's call him Sigtryggr, because that's an excellent Viking name, and someone here almost certainly has it, tests him constantly. Not just in sparring, but in loyalty. Would you fight your own people, he asks one night. Uhtred doesn't answer, but he doesn't say no. Historians still argue whether Uhtred ever truly turned on the Saxons, or whether he always intended to return quietly, gathering strength among those who thought him one of their own. The truth. Probably somewhere in between. He was a boy living two lives each, real, each incomplete. A quirky tidbit: Norse training often involved holmgangs, ritual duels fought on small islands or marked out plots. These fights weren't always to the death, but losing often meant loss of land honor or teeth. Uhtred would have witnessed these regularly, possibly participated, possibly won, possibly cheated. It's unclear, but a very Uhtred move. Another fringe fact: some warriors trained with weighted practice swords carved from dense wood. They believed that if you could swing one of those for an hour, a real sword would feel like a feather. Uhtred's forearms could probably snap a turnip in half. Not that anyone's measuring. Tonight's feast is for a victory, some raid inland, a successful return, with livestock silver and a monk who looks like he regrets every life choice. Uhtred watches the dance of joy and violence. This is the reward for loyalty: meat, mead, and songs sung loudly and off-key. But you notice something in his eyes. Not resentment exactly. Not longing either. Something quieter. Calculation, maybe. The boy has learned to wear masks, to be Danish in a room full of Danes, to be Saxon when alone with his thoughts. Later you walk with him through the quiet woods beyond the camp. He points out trees used for shipmast, herbs that treat infection, a stream where the best stones are found for sharpening blades. You need to know the land, he says. It remembers more than people do. He's not just a fighter. He's a student of place, of soil, of wind direction, and river crossings. This isn't poetic nostalgia, it's survival. In a time when maps are mostly bad guesses and roads can get you killed, Uhtred learns the world with his feet. You find an old burial site, stones ringed in moss. He kneels, says nothing touches one of the stones. They say the old ones still listen, he murmurs. You ask who the old ones are. He shrugs. Depends on who you ask. Saxons say saints. Danes say gods. I say someone's always listening. It's in moments like these that you feel the tension within him. The hall fires and feasts are one world. This silence, this reverence for land and ancestry is another. Uhtred walks both. Back at camp, an argument has broken out. Someone's been accused of hiding silver. Accusations fly, hands go to hilts, and Uhtred steps in not with force, but with words. He reminds them that next week they raid again, and they'll need everyone breathing. It works. Just, he's not the chieftain, but tonight he holds their ears. Historians still argue whether Uhtred's real strength was his sword arm or his ability to command. He appears in chronicles not as a wild warrior, but as a lord, a leader, a man whose presence made others pause. At night the camp sleeps in layers, those nearest the fire, those wrapped in furs, those who trust others to watch. Uhtred lies among them, eyes closed but not asleep. You sit beside him listening to the crackle of wood, the gentle snore of someone who drank too much mead, and the occasional fart from the dog curled near the embers. This is the boy becoming a man. Not through destiny, not through prophecy, but through sheer relentless immersion in two worlds. And when he wakes tomorrow, he'll be one day closer to making them both his own. Also, the monk from earlier, he's gone. Took a sheep and ran. You admire the commitment. The sun rises reluctantly as if even it would prefer to stay under furs a little longer. Frost clings to the grass and your breath fogs the air. Uhtred is already awake again. He's polishing a blade not for show, but with the kind of habitual care that says this might be the only thing he owns that never lies. Today is training day. Again, you've lost track of how many. Every day is training day if you live among Danes. It's like gym class, but with more blood and fewer whistles. You walk with them to the edge of the woods where a clearing has been carved out of bramble and pride. There's a post stuck into the earth, human-shaped in the vaguest way, wrapped in straw with a wooden shield nailed to its arm. It's been patched so many times it looks like a very unpopular scarecrow. Uhtred faces it. His foster brother Sigtrygr smirks and leans on a spear. "Try not to embarrass yourself this time," he says. Uhtred shrugs and steps forward. The sword he uses today isn't ornamental. It's a well-balanced iron blade slightly chipped along the edge. Functional, dangerous like everything else in this camp. He raises it, steps, left feints, pivots, and drives the blade through the target's midsection with a wet thunk that's both satisfying and deeply unpleasant. "You're still too upright," says a bearded older warrior, his voice dry as tinder. "Someone's going to take your legs and then your head." Uhtred nods, resets, and goes again. He's learning the art of shield walls, too. Not the cinematic version, but the real one. A line of men packed so tightly together that you can smell what they had for breakfast. Shields overlap spears, jab through gaps, and if someone slips, it's not uncommon for his friends to stand on him. You try it once and immediately wish you hadn't. It's like a rugby scrum with spears and no rules. A quirky tidbit. Some warbands trained with painted stones instead of weapons to learn spacing and coordination without the mess. Others just went straight for wooden swords and accepted the bruises as motivation. Another strange fact. Viking-style haircuts weren't just fashion, they served a functional purpose. Having the back and sides shaved made it harder for enemies to grab your hair in battle. Uhtred's is cropped exactly that way now, with a long strip down the center tied into a practical knot. He looks like someone who's ready to fight or sell fish. Possibly both. Sigtrygr challenges him next. No wooden post this time, just real iron and real sweat. They circle. The ground is slick with frost and each step leaves a muddy print. The clash is loud. Metal on metal, then metal on wood, then the unmistakable thunk of a shield being used as a bludgeon. Uhtred grits his teeth, drops to one knee, feints low, and takes Sigtrygr's leg from under him. The boy goes down hard. Everyone laughs. Sigtrygr, to his credit, grins and claps him on the back. "One day I'll kill you for that," he says cheerfully. Uhtred just nods. One day, you walk back toward the hall with them, and the talk shifts not to gods or war, but to haircuts. Apparently, one of the younger warriors has shaved a rune into the side of his head, and now believes he's protected from axe wounds. He's not, but it's a good excuse for poor performance. Inside the hall, a visiting craftsman shows off a new kind of scabbard, reinforced with bone designed to stay intact, even if the sword inside doesn't. He offers it to Uhtred, who politely declines. He prefers something simpler, lighter. He's not interested in ornate things, not yet. Historians still argue whether Uhtred's style as a warrior was influenced more by Norse speed and precision or Saxon discipline and formation tactics. What's clear is that he took what worked from both. He was practical, adaptive, and unromantic about battle. Which, let's be honest, is how you survive it. That night, there's no feast. Just a quiet meal, some dried fish bread, and a watery stew that might once have contained vegetables. Everyone eats in silence, tired from the day. Uhtred sits apart, carving something into the hilt of his sword. You look closer, it's not decoration, it's a tally, a list, a memory. Outside, snow begins to fall softly, blanketing the world. You step out and find Uhtred there leaning against a post, eyes closed, face turned up to the flakes. He says, "The first snow always makes me think of Bebbanburg." You ask what he remembers. The sound, he says, waves hitting stone, and the gulls. I used to hate them, now I miss them. He's quiet for a moment, then adds, "One day I'll go back. Not as a boy, not as someone asking, as someone taking." It's not boastful, it's quiet matter of fact. A line in the snow. Not today, but someday. You don't ask what he'll do if someone else is there. You both know the answer. Later, you find yourself at the edge of the training yard again. The post still stands. Barely. One arm hangs limp, shield split down the middle. You walk closer and notice something carved into the wood, nearly hidden beneath layers of hack marks. It's a name. Uhtred. Just that. No titles, no flourish, not yet. But it's enough. The fire crackles gently in the long hall, casting amber light over the faces of warriors dozing against timber beams. You sit near Uhtred, who's sharpening his blade again, not because it's dull, but because routine is comfort when the world never stops shifting. Tonight, someone mentions a monk who wandered into the camp, claiming to know the true name of every man in Northumbria. He was quickly shown out along with 3 cabbages and a very surprised chicken. Uhtred snorts softly at the tale but doesn't join the laughter. He's thinking, you know that look by now. He finally says they've started writing about me. He doesn't say who, but he's not talking about skalds or bards this time. You lean in, curious. He shrugs. The scribes in the south. They've got a new ealdorman one who wants to be remembered. This is where fact and fiction begin to wrestle in earnest. For centuries, the only Uhtred most people knew was the literary kind, a wild, passionate warrior caught between 2 worlds, chronicled by Bernard Cornwell, and adapted into brooding TV glory with impeccable cheekbones. But buried in dusty charters and ecclesiastical footnotes is a real man. Less cinematic, perhaps, but no less formidable. The real Uhtred of Bamberg was born not in the 800s as the TV series imagines, but more than a century later, around the 970s. He was not a half-Danish orphan adopted by Ragnar. He was a powerful Saxon lord son of Valthiaf of Bamberg, and by the early 11th century he ruled over much of Northumbria. So apologies in advance, but no, he didn't fight alongside King Alfred. That's historical fan fiction. Uhtred, the historical figure, never even met Alfred. Different centuries, different messes. Historians still argue whether Cornwell's Uhtred is loosely based on the real man, or simply inspired by the name and location. Cornwell himself has said the latter. He just liked the idea of a descendant reclaiming his ancestral seat. Which, to be fair, is an excellent plot hook, a quirky tidbit. The real Uhtred had a nickname, Uhtred the Bold. That might sound like something from a children's book, but in 11th century terms it was a serious compliment. Being bold meant fearless in battle and unpredictable in court. 2 traits that made you dangerous and respected often in equal measure. Another historical oddity, Uhtred was known for being unusually literate for a warlord. While not a monk or a scholar, he likely understood Latin, had dealings with church scribes, and was recorded in numerous official documents. That means he wasn't just swinging swords, he was negotiating land deals, writing letters, and probably threatening tax collectors in very fancy handwriting. Back in the long haul, someone teases Uhtred about his name showing up in a monk's book. Will they draw your face too? He asks. Uhtred grins. Only if they want to scare children. You glance at a parchment near the hearth covered in scrawl and soot. It's a land grant written in Old English with Uhtred's name scratched in with awkward flair. Spelled Uhtred naturally because no medieval scribe could agree on how consonants worked. You see a list of lands, some familiar, some lost to time. Among them Bernicia, Lindisfarne, and of course Bamberg. Each parcel means food taxes, soldiers, power. The real Uhtred didn't fight for his identity, he administered it, which in this time was just as dangerous. The night deepens and the conversation turns to another southern king. Ethelred, often called Ethelred the Unready. This nickname was not affectionate. It roughly translates to Ethelred the Ill-Advised, which is medieval politeness for bad at everything except causing problems. During Ethelred's reign, England suffered repeated Danish invasions. Not polite pop-in-for-tea invasions, but full-scale coastal burnings. In the face of this chaos, Uhtred, based in the north, held power independently. While the southern kingdoms flailed, he stabilized. You walk with him through the camp as he explains how every land grant, every oath sworn, every name carved into a scroll builds a wall against erasure. People forget battles, he says. They don't forget titles. You ask if that's why he's so often in court these days, not the kind with powdered wigs, but the smoky, scribe-filled chambers of bishops and kings. He nods. Land lasts. Swords rust. And yet, he still trains, still spars, still stares long into the fire like someone waiting for war. Because it always returns. Historians still puzzle over how a northern lord like Uhtred managed to maintain loyalty in such volatile times. The Saxon Chronicle mentions him often, usually in relation to key alliances and strategic marriages. Some believe he was simply too powerful to challenge. Others suggest he played both sides of every political game and made sure to be indispensable to whoever held the crown that week. Another quirky detail, one contemporary described Uhtred as a man of great presence, which was likely a polite way of saying he could kill you with a look and still be invited to dinner. You imagine him walking into a council chamber full of squabbling nobles, unstrapping his sword and making everyone instantly agree on everything just to get him to sit down. The fire dies low. The warriors sleep. Uhtred still writes slowly, carefully, scratching out a name on the back of the parchment. I want it to be spelled right, he mutters. You lean closer. It's his name, underlined. Then he folds the paper, tucks it away, and leans back. History, he murmurs, is just a sword fight with ink. You suspect he's won more of those than most. The chill of early morning settles into your bones as you trail behind Uhtred on a muddy path that curves through fields once soaked in blood. He walks with purpose, his boots sloshing through puddles without hesitation. Today he rides south, not for battle, but for something stranger diplomacy. You arrive at the fringes of immersion camp. The banners are different here, less wild than the Danes, more orderly, embroidered with crosses and lionish beasts that snarl with muted piety. Saxon soldiers nod stiffly, but their hands rest on sword hilts. You're not entirely welcome. Uhtred most certainly is not. You're here to meet a king, but not Alfred, not even Edward. You're here to meet Ethelstan. The name doesn't get as much attention in school books, but Ethelstan, grandson of Alfred the Great, was arguably one of the most effective rulers England ever had. A master of lawmaking, military unity, and religious PR, Ethelstan is considered by many to be the first true king of all England. Before him, it was mostly a loose confederation of kind of getting along kingdoms. He made it official. Sort of. Historians still argue whether Ethelstan truly ruled Northumbria with loyalty or simply by brute intimidation and strategic marriages. What's clear is that Uhtred was his man, or at least his uneasy ally. You enter a timber hall filled with incense and scrolls and the uncomfortable rustling of advisors. Ethelstan is already there, young, regal eyes sharp as forged iron. He looks at Uhtred the way a chess master looks at a particularly clever knight. Lord of Bamberg, the king says, motioning for Uhtred to sit. Or would you prefer Ealdorman today? Uhtred smiles politely. I answer to both. Depends who's asking. The air is tense but not hostile. You can feel the outlines of a relationship built on respect, not warmth. Aethelstan needs stability in the north. Uhtred provides it. In return, Uhtred gets official backing chartered lands and enough royal ink to make even the monks nervous. A quirky tidbit: Uhtred was given command of a large swath of Northumbria by Ethelstan himself, not just as a reward, but as a bulwark. The north was wild, fragmented, and full of rival claims. By elevating Uhtred, Ethelstan hoped to plant a Saxon flag in enemy soil and keep the Danes just nervous enough. Another fringe fact, Ethelstan loved relics. Like really loved relics. He once gifted Uhtred a portion of St. Cuthbert's bones as a blessing. Uhtred, ever the pragmatist, probably nodded and said thank you, while wondering how to politely store a thumb bone in a fortress with goats. Later, outside the hall, you hear Uhtred speaking with a younger scribe who's been assigned to record his titles properly. The scribe asks if he can call him Uhtred, son of Waltheof, ruler of Bernicia, protector of the northern wall, and defender of St. Cuthbert's land. Uhtred sighs. Just write Uhtred. If anyone needs more than that, they'll hear it from me. He mounts his horse and you follow. The journey back north is long and quiet, broken only by passing messengers and the occasional half-frozen cow blocking the path. At one point, Uhtred stops by a ruined Roman milestone and traces the fading letters. They thought this would last forever, he murmurs. Didn't count on us. He means invaders. Saxons, Danes. Normans, they all take turns wearing crowns and tearing down what came before. Yet the stones still stand, just barely. Historians still argue whether Uhtred was loyal to Ethelstan or merely tolerated him for political convenience. It's possible he played a longer game knowing that supporting Ethelstan would secure his own dynasty. It worked for a time. Back in Bebbanburg, Uhtred returns to his seat of power. The fortress has changed. Stones added, walls repaired. Fires burn hotter now, fed with better wood and more coin. He holds court, not a king, but something close. Locals bring disputes, complaints, occasionally livestock. One man arrives with a deer carcass and accuses his neighbor of sorcery. Uhtred listens, gestures to the deer, and says, "If he bewitched it, tell him to cook it too." The hall laughs, the neighbor sighs. Justice is served. In private, Uhtred walks the ramparts with you. The sea glints in the distance and gulls scream like ghosts above the cliffs. Do you think they'll remember this, he asks. Not just the battles, the talks, the names on paper. You tell him the monks are already scribbling. He snorts, then half of it's wrong. Maybe. But history isn't about precision, it's about shape. And the shape of Uhtred, this warrior lord, this knife's edge between Dane and Saxon oath and ambition, is beginning to solidify in parchment. A storm brews on the horizon. Literally. Thick clouds gather gray and full of rain. Uhtred watches them with narrowed eyes. Always another storm. You ask if he means weather or war. He doesn't answer. The rain falls in sheets so heavy they feel personal, like the sky is settling a grudge. You're back inside Bebbanburg's hall, water dripping from cloaks and helmets pooling around boot heels. A servant hands you something warm in a clay cup ale, you hope. You don't ask. Uhtred sits near the hearth parchment in one hand, a frown in the other. "They've spelled it Uhtred again," he mutters. "And they made my cousin the rightful lord." He stabs the document with a finger. He's not even literate. This is the great medieval headache scribes. Monks in scriptoria across the land, squinting by candlelight, deciding which names to preserve and which to garble beyond recognition. You glance at the page Uhtred it now reads. Or maybe Uhtred. Honestly, it's anybody's guess. Here in the north, Old English is mutating like a bored virus. You hear Saxon in the villages, Norse in the taverns, Latin in the monasteries, and something suspiciously Welsh when the blacksmith gets drunk. No wonder no one can agree on how to spell anything. Uhtred doesn't just deal with this mess, he weaponizes it. If they can't write it down right, he tells you they'll have to come ask me in person. There's a glint in his eye. It's not vanity, it's control. He rides south again this time, not to speak to kings, but to speak to their scribes. At York, he meets with the bishop, who insists on calling him Earl Uhtred. Uhtred leans forward, voice smooth as rain on steel. "Write what you like," he says, "but spell my name as the man who will be reading your will." A quirky tidbit. In some charters, Uhtred appears twice, once as a witness, once as a recipient of land. It's likely clerical error, or it's proof that he was moving fast enough to be in two places at once. Honestly, neither option would surprise you. Another fringe gem. In a 1016 document, Uhtred is listed alongside other lords with fancy Latinized names. His still just Uhtredus. No embellishment. He was either too proud or too practical to bother with Roman cosplay. Historians still argue whether Uhtred actively shaped his written legacy, or if the randomness of medieval record-keeping simply made him look more legendary than he intended. Either way, he's one of the few northern lords whose name turns up repeatedly stubbornly across multiple reigns and crises. You join him on a visit to Lindisfarne, where a monk nervously asks for confirmation on a land boundary. Uhtred doesn't even glance at the map. The river runs to the broken ash tree. The ash leans west. If someone moved it, they owe me an apology. It's accurate. Down to the tree. That's the thing about Uhtred. He's not just powerful. He remembers everything. People, paths, promises. That kind of memory is terrifying in a man who also carries a sword. Back at Bebbanburg, he holds audience. A farmer claims his neighbor has let pigs root through a church graveyard. Were the pigs Christian? Uhtred asks. The man stammers. Then the land's still mine, he concludes, waving the issue aside. That's another charm of Uhtred, the sarcasm. It cuts sharper than a blade and usually lands with more lasting effect. The monks hate it. The soldiers love it. The scribes. They try to ignore it and spell his name differently each time out of revenge. One evening, you sit with him by candlelight. He's going over documents with a local priest who insists on using ink the color of fermented berries. It stains. Uhtred mutters, rubbing his fingers. Smells like failure. The priest asks if he wants a coat of arms, a crest, something to display on banners. Uhtred laughs. I have a face. People remember it. Still a banner is drawn. Rough crimson ink. A black fortress on a cliff. No motto. No animal. Just a single stone wall. You realize then he is the banner. Everything else is weather. That night, thunder rattles the castle stones. You and Uhtred share a drink in a silence. Then he says, they won't forget me, you know. Even if they get the spelling wrong, you believe him. Historians still piece together his life like a jigsaw puzzle made from 4 different sets. They debate whether he was more loyal to Ethelred or Cynut, whether he died in battle or in betrayal, whether he protected Northumbria or played it like a harp. The truth is probably that he did all of it sometimes in the same week. A servant passes through the hall grumbling about another charter. They've written Uhtred this time, he says. Uhtred doesn't look up. Then I'll outthrade them if they come north. You admire the confidence and the threat. As the fire burns low and the rain softens to mist, you find yourself staring at one of those parchments. The ink is smudged, the Latin mangled, but the name is still there, faint but firm. Uhtred. Sometimes history doesn't need perfect spelling. It just needs the right name. The first time you see Bebbanburg from the sea, it looks like a crown set on the head of a sleeping giant. Jagged, ancient, and watching. Even from a distance, the fortress commands respect, or more accurately, demands it. The cliffs are unforgiving, the waves fierce, and the seagulls territorial. You're approaching by ship not in secret, but with cautious intent. Uhtred stands beside you on the deck, arms crossed, hair tangled by the salt air. Looks different from the outside, he mutters. Like something you could lose. He had, for a time. The real battle for Bebbanburg wasn't a singular clash with drums and banners, it was a campaign of politics pressure and a few very strategic marriages. Still, there was almost certainly a siege. Maybe more than one. The records get blurry like a monk's notes after his 3rd cup of mead. The fortress had likely fallen to a rival Uhtred's uncle, his cousin, someone who decided that inheritance should come with a dagger. We don't know precisely how, only that Uhtred was cut off from his ancestral seat and spent years circling it like a hawk just out of reach. And now he's returned. The approach isn't easy. The path winds through marshy lowland, then up into jagged rock, where footing is uncertain, and the wind howls like it has a vendetta. You climb with him slowly, breath rising in mist. Around you are his men, not an army but enough. Veterans, fighters, loyal to him, not just his name. One carries a battering ram. Another has a ladder that's seen better centuries. You begin to wonder if this is more theater than war. Uhtred seems unbothered. Then without warning the gates open. A man emerges dressed in male eyes, wary. Uhtred raises a hand. No need to fight, he says. I'm here to collect what's mine. The man pauses, then shrugs. Fine, but the pigs stay. Negotiation 10th century style. Historians still argue whether Uhtred retook Bebbanburg by force or diplomacy. Some accounts suggest he laid siege. Others imply he walked in and made an offer too intimidating to refuse. Given his track record, both are equally plausible. A quirky tidbit. One local tale says Uhtred tricked the defenders by sending in a bard who sang so badly they abandoned the walls just to get away. Probably not true, but tempting to believe. Another had said that when Uhtred finally re-entered the Great Hall, he refused to sit until his old hunting knife, hidden in a rafter as a boy, was retrieved and returned. A small act, but one that claimed the space as his. Inside the hall is dim but familiar. He walks its length, slowly brushing a hand along the carved beams. The hearth has been rebuilt. The shields on the wall are different, but the bones of the place are the same. You can almost see the boy version of him sprinting through the smoke, wooden sword in hand, dreaming of conquest. He stops at the high seat. The stone beneath it is worn generations of lords shifting, arguing, ruling. Uhtred sits finally. It doesn't look like triumph. It looks like gravity. Later you walk the battlements with him. The sea stretches out endlessly, gray and cold. Hard to believe people used to fear this place, he says. Now it's just mine again. You ask what changed. He smiles faintly, I did. Below the townsfolk gather. They've heard. Word travels faster than arrows in these parts. Some kneel, some simply nod. All of them watch. A messenger arrives breathless, clutching a scroll. A letter from York, he pants. They want confirmation, are you Lord of Bebbanburg again? Uhtred takes the scroll, unrolls it, then tears it in half. They'll figure it out, he says, tossing the scraps into the wind. Historians still try to pinpoint the exact year he reclaimed Bebbanburg. Some say 1006. Others argue for 1016 after political reshuffling under King Nut. What matters more is that he did and that he kept it in a time when keeping anything was a miracle. He calls a council, not to gloat but to govern. Land disputes, tax complaints, a cow that supposedly prophesied rain. Uhtred listens judges and sends people away with answers or at least good advice. You notice that even the men who tower over him defer to his decisions without question. He's not just back, he belongs. That evening, as torches flicker in sconces and the hall fills with the smell of roasting meat and damp leather, a skald stands and begins to sing. The song is about Bebbanburg, its founding, its fall, and its return. The verses are dramatic, possibly exaggerated, and they rhyme honor with bore, which is ambitious. Uhtred listens without expression. When it ends, he raises his cup. It'll do, he says. Then adds, next time make me taller. Laughter fills the hall, rich and relieved. And so the fortress returns to its rightful lord, not in a blaze of glory, but in a storm of subtle maneuvers memory, and just enough menace to avoid bloodshed. Uhtred's victory is not flashy, it's deliberate, earned. You step outside one last time before sleep. The wind is calmer now. The sea below murmurs and the walls around you feel steadier. You wonder how long this peace will last. Not long, you suspect. But for tonight, Bebbanburg stands. And Uhtred stands within it. There's a certain stillness to Bebbanburg now, not the eerie silence of defeat, but the quiet hum of power settled into place. Uhtred no longer walks the halls like a man on borrowed time. He moves like the stones know his name again. You notice the difference in how people speak to him. No more cautious half-bows or sidelong glances. Now it's my lord with a nod that carries centuries of restoration. But power like a freshly sharpened sword demands care, and Uhtred's life is not a tale of peaceful retirement. With the fortress reclaimed, he now turns to the real battlefield loyalty. Today begins with a letter. It arrives not with fanfare, but in the hands of a muddy courier with a limp and a nose broken in 3 distinct places. He hands it to Uhtred with a grunt, then immediately asks for something warm to eat. Priorities. The letter bears a seal, southern unfamiliar and recently made. You see Uhtred's expression harden. It's from Wessex, he mutters. New oaths, again. He reads it aloud, voice flat. They want his fealty, again. To confirm his loyalty, again. To bend the knee, always again. He doesn't tear it up this time. He simply folds it slowly and places it on the table beside his sword. The implication is clear, they sit beside each other, but one will always have the final word. Historians still argue whether Uhtred's shifting allegiances make him a traitor or a tactician. Throughout his life, he swore loyalty to multiple kings, Ethelred Nut Edmund Ironside, and yet somehow remained Uhtred of Bamberg through it all. Perhaps he understood something others didn't, that kings come and go, but land is eternal. A quirky tidbit. One surviving letter from the southern court accuses Uhtred of delaying tribute under the pretext of weather and northern unruliness. In response, Uhtred supposedly sent back a single word, correct, Another strange truth: the further you were from the royal court, the more independence you had. Northumbria wasn't London. Up here, a lord like Uhtred was a king in all but name. He collected taxes, held courts, raised armies. Only the paperwork suggested otherwise. You follow him as he rides out into the countryside, not on a warpath, but a progress, a tour. The lords under him must be seen, spoken to, reminded. Power isn't just earned, it's performed. In one village, he settles a border dispute with a gesture and a joke. If the fence moves again, I'll move your sheep into the church. In another, he breaks bread with the family whose father fought beside him a decade ago. They serve him thick stew and call him Uhtred, not Lord, and he doesn't correct them. But there's tension too. Athen, one of the old Saxon landowners, refuses to meet his eyes. Claims illness. When Uhtred sends a rider to check on his health, the man is suddenly hale enough to flee into the hills. Loyalty, Uhtred says, must be tested, especially when it hides. You return to Bebbanburg as the autumn fog rolls in, curling around the cliffs like an old sleepy ghost. Uhtred meets with his inner circle, men and women, who've stood with him through every oath, broken and renewed. One of them asks what flag they should fly next. Uhtred smirks, mine. They laugh, but the point stands. Historians still question whether Uhtred ever considered taking a crown himself. He certainly had the resources, the land, the lineage, but there's no record of ambition for a throne only for his home. Perhaps that was the difference. He didn't want to rule England, just to hold what was his. In the Great Hall that evening, someone begins to recount the old stories again. Not from books, but from memory tales passed through mead halls and beside fires. Uhtred, son of Valtef the Bard, begins, who held the storm at the northern gate. It's not quite accurate, but everyone listens. Later you find Uhtred sharpening a spearhead absently as if sleep is too far away. You ask if he trusts the southern kings. He doesn't answer for a long time. Then I trust the sea to be wet and kings to be needy. A fire crackles. The night is long and you sit together watching shadows shift across stone. You wonder aloud what will come next. He shrugs. There's always a next. Sometimes it wears a crown, sometimes it wears fur and sharp teeth. He means the Scots. Or maybe the Norse, or maybe just time itself. You step out onto the battlements once more. The wind is sharp, the stars flickering cold above you. Below, the waves crash endlessly against the cliff, soft, distant, inevitable. And in the heart of it all, Uhtred remains no longer chasing power, no longer proving himself. Just keeping what is his. With sword and ink and the weight of every oath he chose to keep or break. Morning in Bebbanburg comes with the sound of gulls shrieking like they've read a bad poem and want revenge. You step into the courtyard, the sea air sharp and bracing, and find Uhtred already awake, standing over a crate of provisions that smells faintly of smoked herring and political trouble. Today a delegation arrives. From the church. Uhtred doesn't roll his eyes. His self-control is stronger than yours, but his jaw does tighten ever so slightly. They always come in pairs, he mutters, like socks or plagues. The clergy aren't just spiritual leaders, they're power brokers, landowners, and on occasion spies with suspiciously clean fingernails. Their robes billow impressively as they dismount their crosses, swinging like warning bells. You're introduced to one Bishop Wulfgar, whose voice could lull a sheep to sleep, and Brother Elfwine, who looks like he's been chewing lemons since childhood. They bring news. The Archbishop of York requests Uhtred's attendance at a synod. Officially, it's about land disputes. Unofficially, it's probably about reminding him he's still expected to kneel in the direction of Rome once a week. Uhtred listens, politely offers wine, which they decline, and says, I'll consider it. In Uhtred speak, that means I'll absolutely ignore it. until someone rides up here again and begs. Once they leave, he sighs. Priests make the worst guess. They never laugh at jokes and they always want to count your sheep. You ask how he handles them. Like I handle wolves, he says. Feed them just enough to keep them out of the barn. Historians still argue whether Uhtred was genuinely pious or simply performed religion for political convenience. He endowed churches, yes, but also once threatened to tie a priest to a cart and roll him into the sea for miscounting taxes. Faith and finance were intertwined. A quirky tidbit: Uhtred reportedly gifted one monastery a bell made from melted down swords. Symbolic, poetic, and also slightly threatening if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Another. In one surviving document, Uhtred signs his name beside a bishop with the note in the margin that reads, "He talks more than he listens." No one knows if Uhtred wrote it or if the scribe just got bored, but either way the shade is palpable. You accompany him to Lindisfarne on a short pilgrimage/PR trip. The monks there are used to his presence. One greets him with a tight smile. "Lord Uhtred, we were just praying for rain." Uhtred gestures to the clouds. "I brought it." They don't laugh, but you do. In the scriptorium, a young monk shows Uhtred the chronicles, a neat row of annals, stretching back 100 years. Names, battles, famines, royal decrees. Uhtred flips through them with the sort of resigned interest, stopping when he finds his own name. Uhtredus Dux. Duke Uhtred. Fancy. He underlines it with his thumb. Wrong title, but they spelled it right this time. Back at Bebbanburg, a priest asks if they can build a small chapel near the outer wall. Uhtred allows it, but it stays small, he adds. "I don't want a tower taller than my keep." That's the balance. He'll allow their gods, their rites, their Latin chants, but they must understand the hierarchy: Uhtred first, then everything else. You walk with him through the lower village where a new chapel is being framed with timber and hope. He nods to the workers, even joins them briefly to help lift a beam, because politics, like masonry, is easier when you put your back into it. A boy watches him with wide eyes. Later, you overhear him whisper to his sister, "That's the Lord who speaks to kings and wrestles ghosts." You raise an eyebrow. "Ghosts?" Uhtred overhears, "I don't wrestle them, I just don't let them win." He means memories or regrets, or maybe actual ghosts. It's hard to tell with him. Historians still discuss Uhtred's uneasy relationship with Christian authority. He wasn't anti-religion, but he didn't bow easily. And he expected the church to pay taxes like everyone else. In one rare letter, he's recorded as finding a monastery for improper boundary stones and excessive bell ringing. Honestly fair? That night, a monk staying the evening in the Great Hall begins reciting scripture. Uhtred listens for a while, then interrupts. "Wasn't there a part about turning swords into plowshares?" "Yes, my lord." "Good," he says. "But don't forget how to hold a sword in case your neighbor keeps the plow." The monk goes very quiet. Later, over a quiet meal, Uhtred finally admits something. "They remember you better when the church writes your story," he says. "But they also change it." You ask if he minds. "Not yet," he says. "But I'll haunt the scribe who writes me as a coward." You smile, but he doesn't. Outside the chapel, bells ring for the first time. They're small, clear, harmless. For now. The morning mist hangs low along the cliffs like a sullen curtain. You can barely make out the sea below, just a dull roar beneath the gray. Inside Bebbanburg's hall, a young man is pacing. You've seen him before, tall, sharp-shouldered eyes, a little too eager. He's Uhtred's eldest son. One of them anyway. Names repeat like bad weather around here. This one is also called Uhtred. Naturally. You hear the elder Uhtred mutter to himself, "I name him after me, and now he thinks he is me." You follow father and son into a side chamber where maps cover the table weighed down with knives' bones and a haphazardly placed apple. They're reviewing landholdings taxation routes, and of course what to do about the Scottish border, which has been annoyingly mobile of late. Young Uhtred points to a village and says, We should move more men there. His father doesn't look up. What we should do is teach them how to hide their grain better. You're watching something familiar now, something ancient and uncomfortably modern, the slow, inevitable friction of inheritance. Historians still argue how many sons Uhtred actually had. Some chronicles mention two, others three. What they agree on is that the line continued, and that managing heirs in a time of fluctuating kingdoms and sword-based negotiation was a job no sane man envied. A quirky tidbit. One of Uhtred's sons reportedly tried to marry into a Scottish clan to secure peace but ended up insulting the chieftain's dog. The resulting fallout included two broken betrothals and one very awkward dinner. Another surviving charter lists Uhtred, son of Uhtred, as a witness, leading to scribal notes that simply gave up and labeled them Uhtred the Elder and Uhtred the Ambitious. Accuracy dubious. Entertainment value extremely high. Back in the hall, the younger Uhtred continues to argue strategy. He wants more aggression, faster responses, bolder moves. We should strike before they even think of raiding, he insists. The elder Uhtred raises a brow. And what will you do when their cousins come next week with twice as many men? I'll fight. And what will your men do? The silence stretches. The lesson lands. You walk with the elder Uhtred later down to the shoreline where the waves foam against jagged rock. He's not wrong, he says. He's just not right yet. You ask if it's hard passing on what he's fought for. Harder than taking it in the first place, he replies. A sword you can win. A name that takes longer. That evening there's a council meeting. Uhtred gathers his most trusted thanes, his son among them. A dispute has arisen between two local lords, something to do with grazing rights sheep, and an alleged sorcerer who cursed a fence. Standard. The elder Uhtred listens. The younger speaks first, sharp, confident, with that dangerous sparkle of someone who hasn't lost often enough yet. He proposes a swift judgment. His father shakes his head. If you punish too quickly, they'll fear you, but they won't follow you. You need both. He turns to the two lords. You'll share the grazing fields. Rotate access. And if either of you mentions curses again, I'll assign a priest and a pig to watch your fences. It works, mostly. Later you catch Uhtred writing something on a narrow strip of parchment. A list, names perhaps, or titles. He folds it before you can see. He says quietly, they think a lord is the man with the most swords, but it's really the man who knows which ones not to use. You stay with him as he watches his son spar under torchlight. The younger Uhtred is fast, fierce, skilled, but impatient. He wins most matches through brute speed, and when he loses, he scowls. I was like that once, the elder Uhtred says. What changed, you ask? I lost something that mattered, then I lost it again. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. Historians still study how succession played out after Uhtred's death. His descendants continued to rule parts of Northumbria for decades, but the stability wavered with each generation. Names stayed the same, but the certainty behind them weakened. In a letter to a southern court, one scribe noted, there are too many Uhtreds now, and all of them believe they are the real one. Back at Bebbanburg, father and son sit beside each other in the firelight. They don't speak. They don't need to. One holds the past, the other itches for the future. You wonder which will prove heavier. The wind comes in from the west today, thick with the smell of wet moss and burnt wood. You're riding with Uhtred through the borderland's open ground, part heath, part marsh, part memory. These are lands claimed by Northumbria, but also by Mercia and Wessex, and sometimes even by a cowherd who swears his grandfather got drunk here once and peed on a stone to mark it. You pass a weather-beaten milestone. It's crooked, lichen-covered, and bears an inscription so eroded it might say, King's Road or Don't Trust Goats. No one's quite sure. This Uhtred says is where maps go to lie. You're entering Mercian territory, though territory here is less about flags and more about who can gather men faster when someone steals a pig. The landscape rolls gently, dotted with sheep and the kind of small, stubborn churches that grow out of the ground like moss-covered teeth. You're here to meet a Mercian ealdorman named Leofwine, one of those powerful but vaguely shaped figures who rules half a shire, 5 forests, and 3 really important bridges. Leofwine and Uhtred have a complicated relationship forged through years of mutual necessity and passive-aggressive feasts. The meeting takes place in a timber hall that leans like it's trying to escape. Inside, smoke hangs thick, the mead is sour, and Leofwine wears a smirk you'd like to remove with a spoon. They speak formally at first. Land exchanges, toll rights, the usual Middle Kingdom dance. But under the surface, there's tension. Leofwine wants a road one that cuts through Uhtred's outer lands. Uhtred wants fewer Mercian tacksmen snooping near his grain stores. You can feel the wheels turning. Not swords yet, but ledgers, spears made of signatures. Historians still argue whether Mercia by this point was an independent kingdom or merely a Wessex puppet draped in old titles. It still had its own lord's traditions and the occasional militia, but most of all it had geography right in the middle of everything, and happy to remind everyone of it. A quirky tidbit. One Mercian thing tried to start a mint in his barn and accidentally produced coins with a pig's head on one side and his own name spelled backwards on the other. Local commerce was briefly vibrant and deeply confusing. Another fringe fact. Mercian law at the time allowed disputes over certain borders to be settled by wrestling. Which sounds silly until you realize it was usually rigged and involved a lot of mud and some very unfortunate tunic choices. Back at the hall, Leofwine suggests a marriage alliance. You've got sons, he says casually. I've got nieces. One of them only bit her last husband once. Uhtred drinks from his cup without blinking. I'll need to see her teeth first. The room laughs. Leofwine doesn't. Later, riding back to Bebbanburg, Uhtred is quiet. He finally says Mercia pretends to be neutral, but they're watching everyone. They'll sell you oats in the morning and the name of your spy by nightfall. You ask if he trusts anyone in Mercia. He shrugs. I trust them to want something. That's a start. Back home, a messenger arrives with a new complication. A Mercian fort near the border has begun collecting tolls on a road that technically belongs to Uhtred. The letter is apologetic flowery, and probably written by a scribe with very clean hands. Uhtred dictates a reply that is shorter. To the man who taxes my roads, he begins, you have 3 days to untax them. Or you'll find your next toll paid in firewood, the kind that's on fire. Historians still debate how Uhtred maintained control over such disputed lands. Some say fear, others respect. Most likely it was consistency. He wasn't fair by modern standards, but he was predictable, and in a world of shifting oaths and broken promises, predictability was its own form of loyalty. That night in the Great Hall, Uhtred draws a map by firelight. It's not pretty, just scratches on scraped parchment, but you can see how he sees the world. Not as borders, but as roads. Rivers, croplands, weak spots. He taps a small village. This one leans Mercian but sells salt to us. Keep him friendly. He taps another. This one owes me goats. Then he leans back. This is how kingdoms are kept. Not by crowns. By remembering which bridge breaks in winter and which farmer likes his cider too much. You ask if he ever wanted to rule a whole kingdom. No, he says, I want mine to last. Outside, the wind shifts again south, now carrying the scent of wood smoke and something faintly metallic. War trade? Probably both. In Mercia is usually a package deal. You wake to the sound of shouting, not the urgent kind. No alarms, no swords, but the everyday bone-deep frustration of landowners arguing over a hedge. You shuffle out into the courtyard just in time to see two minor thins, both red-faced and equally muddy, waving their arms at Uhtred. It was his cattle, one insists. They wandered past the boundary stone. They walked where the gods led them, the other retorts, as if invoking divine bovine navigation. Uhtred pinches the bridge of his nose, sighs, and points to the stone marker. Move the rock 5 paces east, build a fence, split the next calf. But they begin. If I hear another word, I'll name the cow my heir. They leave grumbling, but satisfied. This is how Uhtred handles family feuds and fickle bloodlines, not with drawn swords, but with blunt humor, faster decisions, and a reputation for being just annoyed enough to be obeyed. But not every conflict ends in laughter. Later that day, Uhtred receives a letter from his younger brother. You hadn't heard much about him, probably for good reason. The scroll is short, clumsy, and wrapped with a bit of twine that looks suspiciously like it was once used on a sack of onions. The letter opens formally to my esteemed brother, Lord of Bebbanburg, but quickly turns into veiled complaints. Apparently, he believes he has a claim to the outer lands bordering the river Coquet, based on Mother's promise and a tale told by our uncle, probably while drunk. Uhtred reads it aloud, then eats a piece of bread very slowly. He always did have the memory of a cabbage. You ask if he'll respond. I'll ride there, he says. Let him say it to my face. Historians still argue whether Uhtred ever had direct blood rivals, or if these disputes were more about politics than parentage. In truth, noble lines were rarely clean. With second marriages, half-siblings, and fostered heirs' inheritance was less of a line and more of a braided rope with knives tied to it. A quirky tidbit. In Northumbrian law, you could claim inheritance through a trial involving 3 oaths and 1 symbolic sword dance. It was rarely successful and often fatal, but very memorable. Another oddity, family trees were often kept orally. You'd gather your elders, chant a list of ancestors, and hope someone remembered which cousin died in a ditch and which one married a Dane and vanished. It was less genealogy, more local gossip with consequences. You accompany Uhtred on the ride to his brother's land. It's a modest estate, a few stone buildings, sheep, a muddy stream. His brother greets him stiffly, wearing a fur-lined cloak about 2 sizes too grand for him. I meant no offense, the brother begins, which is always a sign offense is imminent. But I believe my son deserves... Your son Uhtred interrupts, barely speaks, smells like mold, and last week tried to fight a goose. Silence, awkward, heavy, productive silence. A compromise is made. Uhtred offers a smaller, less contested plot further inland, good for grazing, not so good for glory. The brother accepts, begrudgingly. On the ride back, Uhtred shakes his head. Family makes everything messier, except taxes. They always avoid those. You nod. He continues more quietly. I've had to fight Danes, Scots, and priests, but nothing's more dangerous than a cousin with ambition. Back at Bebbanburg, a new problem arrives, this time from within his own household. A nephew, bold and brash, has started gathering support among younger warriors. He's been offering them gifts, spreading stories. Harmless, maybe, but familiar. Uhtred calls him in. Doesn't yell, doesn't accuse. Just pours 2 cups of ale and says, if you want what I have, say it now. Or walk away forever. The nephew stares at the floor, drinks, walks away. Historians still wonder how Uhtred maintained such iron control without constant warfare. Perhaps it was presence. He showed up, settled feuds personally, remembered names, watched everyone. You never quite knew what he'd do, but you knew he'd do something. That night you find him writing again, another list. This one is shorter. He says blood makes claims, but loyalty makes heirs. Outside, the stars are sharp above the cliffs. You hear a dog bark. Somewhere a cow complains. And inside Bebbanburg, the man who holds it by birth, by blade, by stubborn refusal to die, keeps the ledger of family in one hand and the reins of power in the other. You just hope no more relatives show up. The sun creeps across the horizon like it's not entirely convinced about rising today. You ride with Uhtred again this time into Mercia's borderlands, but not for war or tribute or even an awkward feast. This is about cows. More precisely, cows that have wandered into disputed pasture land, claimed by three different lords, all of whom are somehow convinced they own it, and all of whom have brought maps that look suspiciously like reused chicken recipes written on the back of old charters. You arrive in a glum hamlet where the cows in question, about 12 of them, large and bored, are standing in the road like they expect someone to apologize. Each lord has a handful of men with them, all arms crossed and expressions tight. The kind of mood where insults come before swords and swords come before facts. Uhtred doesn't dismount. He scans the scene, then raises his voice. Who fed them? Silence. He points to a pail nearby. Who filled that with grain? One of the lords frowns. My man, but only because then they're yours. Feed what you want to keep. Fences are lies, stomachs tell the truth. You would think this settles it. It mostly does, except for a half-hearted argument about hoof prints and medieval cow psychology. Uhtred ignores it. He's already riding off again, cloak flapping in the breeze like an impatient flag. This is the messy middle of Mercia land, so argued over that the trees probably have opinions. Borders drawn with sticks erased by rain and redrawn by whichever noble had more oxen that month. Historians still debate whether Uhtred's control extended into Mercia, or whether he merely influenced it like a large, heavily armed rumor. His presence is recorded in charters from both sides of the divide, usually attached to words like agreement overlordship or mildly terrifying gentleman with sword. A quirky tidbit. In one record, Uhtred is listed as peace broker and fence setter, which sounds pastoral until you realize the fence in question was the result of 3 duels, 2 burned barns, and a wedding that ended in a brawl. Another Mercia once issued an edict banning all feuding for 3 months. No raids, no theft, no poetic insults. It lasted 8 days. You travel next to a market town near Tamworth. Nominally Mercian, actually controlled by whoever shows up that week with the most goats. Uhtred walks through it like he owns the place. People nod. Bow. A butcher offers him salted pork. A child hands him a turnip. Why a turnip, you ask? He shrugs. Might be symbolic, or maybe he just didn't like it. You meet with a local reeve who wants to know if Uhtred will support Mercian leadership in a coming vote for Sheer Reeve. Uhtred listens, politely nods once and says, depends on the shire. And the reeve. Subtle, calculated, pure Uhtred. On the ride home, he speaks slowly, half to himself. Mercia's not a kingdom, it's a patchwork. Hold one square too tightly and the others tear loose. You ask how he manages it. I don't. I make it think it manages itself. Back in Bebbanburg, a letter arrives this time from Wessex. Again. You're beginning to suspect they're just lonely. This one praises Uhtred's recent handling of the cow affair, which is now apparently famous across at least 3 courts. There's even a poem. Uhtred reads it. It rhymes lord with gourd. He grimaces. I've been reduced to livestock verse. You sit with him that night in the great hall, warm with fire and spiced ale. He draws on a wax tablet sketching maps, roads, trade routes, dots, and lines that reflect real lives. He marks villages that lean Saxon, those that favor the Danes, others still caught in some older belief. He murmurs they all think in tribes, I think in paths. Historians still argue whether Uhtred's vision of unity made him a precursor to England's eventual cohesion, or just a shrewd warlord who hated walking into the same border argument twice. Whatever the truth, his method worked. Even here, deep in the Mercian mire where law's flexible and cows vote with their hooves, Uhtred is respected. Not because he's liked, but because he's consistent. Later, you find him watching the stars wrapped in a cloak, a bowl of stew cooling beside him. He points upward. That one's the road star, he says. Follow it, and you'll reach Tamworth by sunrise. You nod, though you're not entirely sure he's right, but somehow you still believe him. The torches burn low in Bebbanburg's great hall, the air thick with the scent of ash and mead and old wood. You sit at Uhtred's side as he scratches out another letter, this one to a Norse earl in York. The tone cordial, firm, lightly threatening. The sort of letter that says, let's not fight, but if we do, I'll win. The city of York looms large now, both in the minds of rulers and in Uhtred's thoughts. It's the center of Northumbrian power, the jewel, the prize, the constant headache. Once Viking-controlled, then Anglo-Saxon, then back again depending on who married whom or who burned what. You ask if Uhtred plans to visit. He smirks, not visit, just check in. You travel south with him along the winding roads that connect fortress to fortress, each one with its own banner, its own politics, and at least one local brew that someone insists is the best north of the Humber. York is surrounded by low hills, its stone walls standing proud against a moody sky. As you approach, the bustle grows merchants, soldiers, clerics, all churning through the gates like bees in a very tense hive. Uhtred's arrival causes a stir. No trumpets, but heads turn, eyes narrow. The gate guard looks nervous. My lord, we weren't expecting. You never are, Uhtred replies and walks in anyway. The York of Uhtred's time is not the polite tourist haven with gift shops and Viking museums. It's cramped, loud, and heavy with wood smoke. Norse and Saxon languages intertwine in the air like two crows fighting over a fish. Inside the city hall, you meet the current Norse earl, a smooth-tongued, well-dressed man named Ragnald, who greets Uhtred with a grin that's mostly teeth. I was just reading your last letter, he says. Did you finish it? Uhtred asks. Or stop when it stopped being polite. They sit, they talk, the game begins. Ragnald wants autonomy. York is a city of merchants and markets, not mud and feuds. Uhtred wants stability. York can't be left to drift, not with Scots in the north, and Wessex always looking for an excuse to unify something. Historians still argue whether Uhtred ever ruled York directly, or whether he merely managed it through alliances, threats, and extremely pointed banquets. Some charters list him as Ealdorman of Northumbria, which suggests oversight. Others don't mention him at all, which suggests the scribes were afraid to. A quirky tidbit. One Norse chronicle refers to Uhtred as the Wolf of Bebbanburg, and notes that he smiles with his mouth but not his eyes. You saw that smile earlier when a servant spilled soup. The description holds. Another fringe detail: York's cathedral at the time was under repair after being accidentally burned during a wedding feast that involved too many torches and not enough common sense. Uhtred walks past it now, shaking his head. Too grand, he says. A good church should be small enough that liars can't hide in it. At dinner, he's seated beside the city's bishop, a nervous man named Elfric, who tries to lecture him on divine patience. I have patience, Uhtred says between bites. That's why you're still talking. The bishop goes quiet. Later, over a map, Ragnald gestures to the river that flows through York. You control the land. I control the water. We both win. Uhtred replies until someone starts building boats. They toast. They lie. They agree to terms neither intends to keep. On the ride back north, you ask if that was a success. I kept him talking, Uhtred says. That's enough. Back at Bebbanburg, there's news waiting. Norse traders have paid tolls early. Mercian scouts were seen near the old bridge, and someone found a coin stamped with Uhtred's name and a fish. He keeps the coin, not the fish. He walks to the top of the ramparts that night, watching the moon hang over the sea like a silver shield. You ask if he trusts Ragnald. About as far as I can throw his cathedral. Still, he doesn't order war. Doesn't summon men. Just watches. Waiting, always calculating. Historians still puzzle over Uhtred's restraint. A man of war who chose peace when it suited him. A Saxon who negotiated like a Dane? A lord whose control extended not through conquest, but through presence. You sit beside him, the stone cold beneath you, the sea hissing in the dark. If York rises against you, you ask. He replies without looking away. Then I remind them who holds the north. And for a moment, with the wind in his cloak and the fortress behind him, you believe it. You wake to the sound of shouting again, but this time it's different. It's not a dispute over fences or cows or whose cousin cursed which chicken. This is sharper, urgent. One of the guards runs past mud-streaked on his boots, shouting two words that make everyone straighten. They're coming. You find Uhtred already dressed, already armed, already annoyed. I told them York wouldn't hold, he mutters. Too many merchants, not enough walls. The Norse Earl Ragnald in all his silk and confidence has been pushed out. A rival faction has seized York. Word is they're flying a red banner and speaking more Danish than the last batch. Worse still, there's rumor that they're eyeing Bebbanburg next because what's power if you don't test it? You follow Uhtred into the war room, really just a heavy table covered in oil-stained maps and sharp knives used as paperweights. His captains gather murmuring, glancing toward the northern windows like invaders might peek over the horizon any moment. We won't wait for a siege, Uhtred says. We meet them first. And just like that, the real battle for Bebbanburg begins. You ride with him north and west, skirting rivers, crossing fields soaked in yesterday's rain and tomorrow's blood. Uhtred moves quickly, always a step ahead. His scouts whisper that the enemy is slower, weighed down by wagons and their own egos. By dusk, your camp is set near a bend in the old Roman road halfway between Bebbanburg and York. Fires flicker low. The men eat quietly, sharpening blades that already know what to do. Uhtred doesn't speak much. He walks the perimeter, checking shields, testing bowstrings, offering a nod or a quiet word where it's needed. He's not a king, but you'd follow him into fire anyway. Historians still argue over the nature of this battle. Some call it a skirmish. Others say it was a larger conflict, one that reshaped power across the north. What they agree on is that Uhtred held the line. He always did. A quirky detail. Before the fight, Uhtred reportedly tied a red cloth around his sword hand, not for flair, but to remind himself not to grip too tightly. A tense hand dies first, he said. Whether he believed it or just wanted to look dramatic, we'll never know. Another tidbit, one of his captains supposedly carried into battle a wooden icon of Saint Cuthbert. That was also hollow and filled with mead. Protection and refreshment, all in one blessed bundle. The battle itself is brief, brutal, and terribly loud. You stand behind the shield wall, the crash of iron on iron so close it feels like breathing through thunder. Uhtred fights not at the front, but just behind it, watching, stepping in only when needed. He's not here for glory. He's here to win. When the enemy falters, Uhtred signals a flanking move, clean, disciplined. Devastating. The Norse force crumbles not all at once, but in layers like bread gone stale too long. They break and run, and Uhtred doesn't chase. He pulls the men back, tends to the wounded, offers no cheer, no boasting, just a tired nod and a single word. Enough. Back at camp, you help tend wounds. Uhtred moves through the ranks, checking faces, remembering names. He pauses by one young soldier, barely conscious hand, gripping a broken spear. You held the line, Uhtred tells him. That's what matters. The boy manages a crooked smile. Later back at Bebbanburg, the hall is quieter than expected. No great feast, no rowdy celebrations. Just bread, salt, and wine. The old ways, respect. Uhtred meets with his council. They want to know what comes next. March to York. Punish the traitors, install a puppet. He says no. He's tired. But more than that, he's done playing their game. They can keep York, he says. It's a city of paper. I hold stone. Historians still debate whether Uhtred could have taken York and ruled it directly. The power was within reach. But perhaps by then he understood something more important, that some prizes demand too high a tax, not in silver but in peace. That night you find him on the battlements again watching the stars. The wind has shifted calmer now, the air almost warm. "You know why I didn't chase them?" he asks. You shake your head. "Because a wolf doesn't chase fleas, he shakes them off." The sea sighs far below. Bebbanburg stands. Uhtred stands with it. And the war, for now, is over. The frost comes earlier this year. You wake to find the windows rimed with delicate ice curling like runes only winter understands. Outside, the ground crunches beneath every boot. Even the goats walk more carefully. Inside Bebbanburg's hall, Uhtred sits with a visitor, a weather-worn trader from the coast, hunched like driftwood and smelling faintly of fish and secrets. He brings no tribute, only news. Stories of who's saying what and where. Word is the trader says the king in the south speaks your name more sweetly these days. Uhtred raises an eyebrow. Sweet words are usually followed by hard requests. The trader nods. There's talk of writing your name into the royal histories, of making sure your deeds are remembered. There's a silence. Uhtred says nothing. Then do they want the truth or just a good ending? Because now the question begins to change. It's not just what has Uhtred done, but what will be said about it. You walk with him later through the outer village. A woman stops him to offer a loaf of barley bread. A child asks if it's true he once killed a man by thinking very hard at him. He says yes. The child gasps. You suspect it's not the first time he's told that version. But legacy is strange like that. It prefers the amusing lie to the dull truth. And Uhtred he's starting to notice. Inside the keep, a monk from Lindisfarne has arrived. Sent, he says, to record the northern events more faithfully. Uhtred eyes the man with mild suspicion and several layers of amusement. You'll write what I say, he asks. I'll do my best, my lord. And if I say I once fought 10 men at once blindfolded while quoting scripture, the monk freezes. I'm joking, Uhtred adds, mostly. Historians still argue about these records. Some paint Uhtred as a loyal Saxon lord bulwark against the Norse. Others frame him as a cunning opportunist loyal only to himself. And yet others describe him with reverence protector of the North stabilizer of chaos. A quirky detail. One early chronicle includes Uhtred in a list of northern saints and strongmen, tucked between an abbot who cured headaches and a blacksmith who claimed to forge holy anvils. An odd crowd, but memorable. Another fringe fact, a scribe in Wessex once confused Uhtred with another lord named Ethelred and mistakenly attributed a monastery's founding to him. Uhtred, upon hearing this, supposedly said, "Tell them I'll take the credit so long as they don't ask for donations." You find him that night reading a worn parchment, squinting slightly. "It's my name," he murmurs, "written too many ways. Uhtred, 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 all wrong, all me." He tosses it into the fire. Let them spell it how they like. I'll still be the one who held the wall. But you can tell it gnaws at him. Outside, the banners flap in the wind. The men are training in the yard shield drills, spear throws, the usual controlled chaos. One of the younger warriors breaks form to run up to Uhtred. "My lord," he says breathlessly, "someone in York says you turned coward after the last battle." Uhtred stares at him. "And you rode this far to tell me that?" "I thought you'd want to respond." "I just did." The boy looks confused. If they're still talking about me, Uhtred adds, they're still afraid. You wonder in this moment what kind of legacy Uhtred wants. Not glory, not sainthood, something simpler, something harder. To be remembered rightly. That night he meets with the monk again. No fire, no food. Just 2 chairs and a quiet room. "I'll tell you the truth," he says. "Write it if you must. But don't make me into something I wasn't." "And what were you?" the monk asks. Uhtred thinks for a long time, then says, "I was there, when others weren't." Maybe that's enough. The snow falls like ash, soft, slow, and strangely final. Bebbanburg is quiet today. Even the goats seem subdued, their usual bickering replaced by cautious chewing. Winter has a way of making everything seem more thoughtful. Even Uhtred. You find him seated beside the hearth, a thin wool blanket over his shoulders, and a half-finished carving in his hands. It's not a weapon. It's a wolf rough-hewn, unfinished, and oddly gentle. They used to call me that, he says. The wolf of the north. He turns it over. Now I'm carving one out of boredom. He's older now. Not slow, not fragile, but the edge is different. Sharpened inward. The battles are fewer, but the weight of them still lingers. A rider arrives that afternoon. A monk from Durham, young, red-nosed, flustered. He brings a letter, 2 loaves of bread, and a poorly concealed fear of everything that moves. Uhtred breaks the seal and reads the letter aloud. To Lord Uhtred of Bebbanburg, greetings from the scriptorium of St. Cuthbert. We humbly request the honor of recording your lineage and deeds for inclusion in our compiled histories of Northumbrian lords. He lowers the letter. They want to write me into stone, with all the other dead men. You wait for the usual sarcasm. It doesn't come. Instead, he rises and walks to the window. Snow drifts past the glass. Below, a group of soldiers drills with wooden weapons, laughing between strikes. One of them calls out a familiar name, Uhtred, and 3 men answer at once. You hear that he says, "They'll never stop naming them after me." One day they won't even know why. He agrees to meet the monk. They sit in a side room lined with scrolls and winter light. The monk asks polite questions, birth dates, bloodlines, military campaigns. Uhtred answers, but never quite the way he's supposed to. Were you the first lord of Bebbanburg to resist the Norse? No, just the one who made it inconvenient. Did you found any churches? No, but I didn't burn them either. Did you swear loyalty to King Connacht? Uhtred smiles. I swore loyalty to the idea of not dying. Historians still argue how Uhtred died. Some say he was murdered by rivals. Others say he died in battle. A few whisper he retired and simply disappeared into the cold, like a wolf returning to the hills. There's no clear record, but there is a tomb. You visit it years later, or maybe just imagine its simple low near an abbey wall. The stone reads only Uhtred. No titles, no dates, just the name. A quirky tidbit. The monks of Durham claim that Uhtred's body was buried beside St. Cuthbert's for protection. Not for Uhtred, for the saint, just in case. Another oddity centuries later, a local legend claimed that Uhtred's ghost roamed the fields on moonless nights, checking fences, muttering about taxes, and occasionally cursing cows back onto the right property. You return to the hall and find Uhtred asleep in his chair, the wolf carving on the table beside him. The fire is low. Outside, the snow has stopped. He wakes with a start. Did they finish writing it? Most of it, you say. He nods, then stands, stretches, and mutters, let's make sure they didn't get it too right. He heads to the scriptorium, reed pen in hand. You don't follow, not this time. Some parts of a man's legacy are best left between him and the page. Later, the monk emerges looking a little dazed. He corrected everything he says. You smile. Back in the hall, Uhtred eats a quiet meal, breaking bread with no fanfare. Outside, the snow begins to melt just a little. In the distance, the gulls scream over the sea like they always have. Bebbanburg stands, and Uhtred for now stands within it. There's a chill in the air today, not from winter, but from something quieter. The kind of cold that settles when a story begins to end. You walk through Bebbanburg's outer yard past familiar faces, guards mending a gate hinge, a cook yelling at someone for stealing onions, the stable hand, teaching a boy how to hold a saddle properly. Life continues, but it's slower now, less urgent. As if the fortress knows its lord is thinking of what comes after. Inside, Uhtred stands before the hearth again holding a sword. Not the one he's fought with for decades, but an older one nicked, dulled a little, warped from years of damp and use. He turns it in his hands the way some men turn over prayers. "This is my father's," he says, "before they killed him at Eoforwick." You say nothing. He continues, "I never sharpened it. Not once. It wouldn't be his then. Just something I turned into mine." You watch him place it gently back on the mantel. More relic than weapon now. A messenger arrives near midday. News from the south. King Nut is calling a council one of those large, slow-moving things where important people drink too much and write laws that no one north of York will ever read. Uhtred is invited as always. He tosses the invitation aside. "I'm done with councils." You ask if he worries what they'll say about him when he's gone. "I know what they'll say," he replies, "but I care more about what the people here say. And the land? The land remembers." Historians still debate what role Uhtred played in the years after Nut's rise. Some claim he became a royal advisor. Others say he retreated entirely, tending only to Bebbanburg and its borders. The truth likely lies in the middle, guarding his realm, while letting others scramble for crowns. A quirky tidbit. A letter from a minor noble once asked Uhtred to send advice about the Danish threat. The only reply recorded is a single word, possibly real, possibly legend, hide. Another one chronicler claimed Uhtred had a pet raven that only landed on the shoulders of men who lied. Unsurprisingly, it spent a great deal of time in royal courts. You walk with him along the battlements one last time. He moves slower now, but with no less purpose. His gaze sweeps the horizon, not out of fear, but memory. Every tree, every ridge, every stream has a story tied to it. He tells you about the time he tracked raiders across those woods, about the girl who once carved her name into the stone near the river, about the path where he buried a friend. "Do you regret anything, you ask?" "Of course," he replies, "but not the things I thought I would." He watches a pair of his grandsons sword-fighting below poorly loudly with a great deal of enthusiasm and very little coordination. "Look at them," he says. "If I die tomorrow, they'll still be fighting over who gets the better horse." You laugh. That night, the hall is full again. No grand feast, just bread, roasted meat, and old songs. The bard begins a tune about the Battle of Durham, where Uhtred led a defense so bold even the monks had to admit it might have been divine intervention. Uhtred cuts him off halfway. "Sing something less flattering," he says. "I've heard that one too often, even from myself." And so the bard switches to a drinking song about a goat that got into the ale barrels and ruined a treaty. Much better. As the fire dies low, Uhtred sits back and whispers, "Do you think people will still speak my name in 100 years? You answer honestly, "Yes, but not the way you want." "They'll say I was brave," he says. "Maybe ruthless, maybe clever. But not that I was tired. Not that I had to choose between 10 wrong things and hope one of them wasn't fatal." He sighs. "I suppose that's all right." Outside, the wind picks up. You feel the fortress breathe again, wood and stone, creaking embers, glowing banners, shifting in the cold. Bebbanburg doesn't just endure, it remembers, and so will we. The snow has returned light as dust, quiet as breath. Bebbanburg lies beneath a thin white veil, its walls softened by the hush of winter. You walk the grounds at dawn, no footsteps yet, no voices, just the distant sea and the slow creak of old timbers stretching into the day. Inside the hall, Uhtred is already awake. He sits by the hearth with a bowl of broth, alone content. He doesn't speak until you sit beside him. "This place," he says, "was stone before I was bone. And when I'm gone, it'll still be here, unless some idiot sets it on fire." You smile, and so does he slightly. The monk returns that afternoon. The one from Durham. He brings with him a bound copy of the latest annals. "Your name is in this," he says, holding it like a newborn calf. 3 pages. Perhaps more when the other scribes add their ink. Uhtred takes it with both hands, thumb brushing the edge of the vellum. He doesn't open it. I know what I did, he says. I don't need to see what they think I did. Still, he places it gently beside his sword, letting it rest, letting it exist. That evening, the sky turns the color of old pewter. Uhtred walks the ramparts one final time, pausing now and then to lean against the stone to listen. Not to the wind or the waves this time, but to nothing. I spent so much of my life fighting for this place, he says. I thought it would feel like victory, but it's quieter than that. Like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. You ask if he's ready to let it go. He shakes his head. No, but I've made it ready to keep going. That's different. A few of his grandsons run past below shouting nonsense, chasing each other with sticks. One trips, the others laugh. The same sounds you heard in the courtyard 20 years ago. And 20 before that. You wonder how long those echoes will last. Historians still ponder Uhtred's final days. Did he die peacefully in his hall? Did he fall in one last skirmish, sword in hand? Or did he simply fade into memory the way old wolves do? Quiet, sharp-eyed, and already part of the land. We'll never know for sure. But we know this Bebbanburg stood. And the man who held it gave it more than stone and fire. He gave it blood, yes, but also shape, legacy, and story. A quirky tale still survives in the local villages. That Uhtred's ghost appears only once a year in the first snow. He walks the walls, checks the gates, and if all is well, he simply nods and vanishes. Still watching, still protecting. Another old woman swears she once saw him in a dream, standing beside her hearth, telling her to plant turnips closer together. She says the crop that year was the best she'd ever had. You sit beside him in the hall one last time. The fire burns low, casting long shadows that stretch toward the rafters. He says nothing now, just breathes and watches. The sword stays sheathed, the name stays known, and Bebbanburg as always endures. So now as the snow continues to fall and the sea murmurs far below, you feel the story easing to its end. You've walked with Uhtred across muddy roads and crumbling walls. You've heard his voice rise in anger, drop in weariness, and whisper in memory. You've stood behind him on battlefields and courtrooms by fireside chairs. You've seen what power costs and what it can preserve. And now you leave him here where he belongs. Within stone walls he rebuilt beneath stars he once named. Not as a hero sculpted from legend, but as a man sharp, flawed, and entirely unforgettable. The hall grows quiet. The fire dwindles to coals. Outside the wind drifts softer now, brushing over the parapets and whispering through the long grass where old footsteps fade. You breathe slower. There's nothing left to chase. No more swords to draw, no oaths to make or break. Just the weight of stories behind you and the comfort of stillness ahead. Let your shoulders drop. Let the night settle. You are safe. You are far from the noise of kings and battles and histories twisted by ink. Tonight you are simply a guest in the last chapter of a long, long life. The wolves have gone quiet. The land is at rest. And the name Uhtred echoes not in fear or glory, but in peace. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.